Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And today we have Katherine with us. But Katherine, before we take off, before we start, we want to know, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, I am. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Let's do this because we have today one of the United States' most foremost educational futurists, with Katherine Prince, and she leads KnowledgeWorks' exploration of the future of learning. As the Vice President Strategic Foresight, she speaks and writes about the trends shaping education over the next decade and helps education stakeholders strategize about how to become active agents of change in shaping the future. She earned a certificate in Foresight from the University of Houston and is a member of the Association of Professional Futurists. So, Katherine, is there anything we're missing from that intro that you might want to highlight before we go?
I think that's a comprehensive intro. I'll just mention that as part of that practice of engaging folks in exploring the future, KnowledgeWorks did launch in July of 2021 our first game called Impact Learning Edition. And we're excited to talk with you about what that's added to our practice and what went into thinking about that.
That sounds fantastic. But before we get, all into, how you created that game and more details around that, we would like to get to know you a little bit more. Like, what does a regular day or what does a day in the life of Katherine nowadays look like?
I work from home, and I have been doing that for about 11 years. So I get to my home office and need a lot of time on the computer, meeting with other people at my organization, KnowledgeWorks. I lead a team of a total of 5 of us who are looking at the future of learning, and I'm contribute to the organization's broader leadership team. So lots of time spent on Zoom, coordinating work. We usually have several projects running at a time to generate content related to the future of learning, so making sure those are going along, contributing to some of those, so a lot of writing, reviewing, that kind of thing. And then also some of those days contain engagements with folks who want to work with us around the future of learning, which at the moment is still digital, but soon will also involve some days on the road.
Interesting. And in general, what would you say, like, is there a like when somebody approaches you to do some work about the future of learning, what would that look like?
So often somebody has heard about our work, maybe read something that we've written about the future of learning, and they come to us and say, could you design an engagement to help us apply insights from that, or just think generally about the future of learning in our context? So there's usually some kind of strategic objective they have. Maybe they want to plan more astutely for how the world is changing. Maybe they have a more specific objective, and they'll ask us to generally custom design some kind of way of engaging a group of people in thinking about the future, whether that's for a couple hours or longer. It can really range.
So kind of a workshop kind of style of working with those other organizations, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, with a real focus on seeding some ideas and then working with people to help them generate ideas and really make sense of future possibilities in their context. So, and to leave with some sense of, well, how can I move forward to shape the future of learning or pursue what my organization is trying to achieve with a better understanding of that future time horizon.
Interesting. So within that context, I'd like to know, like, how did that idea or how did it come to be that you went into the creation of a game?
So we're always looking for ways to engage people effectively in exploring future possibilities and to communicate effectively about the future. So that is often in those workshop settings. It's often in various forms of writing or webinars or any number of kind of channels. But my colleague, Maria Romero, had been involved in adapting a version of a Foresight game called Impact for the U.S. Forest Service. And she said, this could be a nice addition for us, just have one more way of engaging people around the future. So we got permission from the original creators of that game Idea Couture and its parent company, Cognizant, to adapt the game for the education space. And really, we did it because we knew that it can be really hard to think about the future, to deal with the level of uncertainty and change that it inherently represents. And the more we can be thinking about how we do that on different registers, in different kind of ways of thinking, with different kind of emotional tones, like the more possibility we'd have to kind of engage people effectively.
Nice. So it basically came from a colleague. She and as I understand, she had been working with the adaptation of this in other contexts, right?
That's right. She had been involved in adapting the original Impact game for the United States Forest Service and then using it with groups of people to think about the future of that organization and their services. So she was very familiar with the game. She understood kind of the mechanics behind it, and not just how to play it, but how to make it, and thought that it could be a really powerful tool to extend KnowledgeWorks' future of learning practice.
And in that same practice, like, would you say when you both came up with the idea, she brought it up, you sort of accepted it going forward. I'm sure that there were ups and downs. There were, moments where things were just going well. And there were times where, that you found, I'm convinced at least that in general, we tend to find difficulties in almost everything we do. And I'd like to know if there was any of those moments that you would be able to sort of comment on, and how did you go about it? Like, what were the kind of solutions that you went for?
Yeah, so two come to mind, and among what I'm sure could be a long list. But the first is that although we didn't have to create brand new mechanics of the game, kind of the whole way the game worked was already established because we were doing an adaptation, we had to generate the content for using the kind of approach to the game in the context of education. And so the game has 10 domains, and basically when you play, you're having an impact on those domains in various ways. So we needed to have the gameplay be balanced so that those 10 domains got kind of equal footing in the game, and anyone kind of working for those domains to be strong in the future, as on behalf of their avatar, the character they play the game with, could have an equal chance of winning the game and having a successful outcome or future of the game. So there were times when we had to get really creative in thinking about what content could apply, or how we might think of the impacts of the changes we were putting on the game cards in a way that could relate to the domains and kind of the spread that we needed it to have.
Nice. And how did you go about those? Like when those kind of difficulties, maybe not a specific one, or yes, a specific one, however you want to go, how did you face it? Like, what was the organization that does so many other things as well? How did you face these challenges?
Yeah, so we had a team of people, our strategic foresight team, working on the game. So we tended to turn to one another to generate ideas if we would get stuck in thinking about kind of how to write the content in a way that balanced the gameplay. So it just kind of lots of walking through. Here's the 5 cards that we're trying to get the content right for at this point. How do you see it? How do I see it? Here's a new angle. Maybe there's some other kind of research we should explore. Maybe there's a better way to talk about the changes that the cards represent. And I think there were a few times where we just needed to say, we were gonna work with this piece of content. Let's switch it out and maybe try a different starting point. And then Maria was the guru who kind of held how the balance of the gameplay in this massive spreadsheet. So when in doubt, we would turn to her to make sure we were kind of staying within the game's parameters. So it did help to have that collaborative engagement on the team, but also to have one person who is really keeping that kind of overall view of kind of all the detail and how it needed to come together.
Very neat. I think, turning to your peers or other people in a collaboration when you're designing, when you're creating is a fabulous way to lean onto others. And I don't know, I think it's always a neat way, even if they're not working directly on the project, leaning on other people, fellow colleagues is always something that can bring, lots of stuff. Like even from just telling the story of what's going on, sometimes by you telling or expressing how that story is unfolding, it already helps understand what is going on for you, and you yourself get better insights into that. So I think there's all sorts of things. And of course, sharing with other people, there's always, getting a different perspective, getting, another set of eyes, all those things definitely there. But even just by making the effort of explaining somebody else, I've found that can be, even just that can be super useful.
Yeah. And, the team who were making the game couldn't get together during the time we were making it because it was during the pandemic. We live in different locations in the United States, and we were on a travel lockdown. So we were doing that all digitally, but of course we needed to test play the game in order to understand, is it really working? And we were making a boxed game, a physical game, when we couldn't get together. But we do have colleagues, a cluster of colleagues who live in Cincinnati, Ohio, where KnowledgeWorks is based. And we were at a point where in a pandemic where a few of them could carefully come into the office and do some test play. So we really had to draw upon people who, don't normally work with exploring the future to say, just pretend you're a stakeholder. We might meet at a conference or a workshop, another engagement, and have a first go at seeing what it's like to play the game. And their feedback definitely led us to some tweaks in the game itself, and also to how we described it in the gameplay and the other materials around it.
Very nice, very nice. I find it interesting, especially because usually we tend to interview plenty of sort of game designers and people who do this sort of all day, every day, or educators who've been doing this for a while. It's also interesting to see the perspective of somebody who's sort of starting to put your feet into the water and seeing how that goes on. Of course, definitely having the support of Maria seems to have been like very, very important thing. But as well, for you and thinking of, play testing and all these things that in many cases are easy to forget or to ignore and say, we'll play test it when it's ready and see, if it works or not. And if it didn't work, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. We don't tend to think about those things naturally, but seeing that you guys went through all this, I think it's a very, very interesting process. Yeah,
and we are new to the world of creating games, but I think partly we were informed by a longer tradition of writing papers collaboratively together. So like some of the basic principles of, a lot of people need to have input and review to make it as good as possible. We'd had experience within another context, and we kind of adapted over to the land of the game.
Absolutely. Collaboration has no sort of borders. There's different ways of collaborating in many different fields. And Katherine, I usually ask about, sort of a proud time for guests, during their journeys of creating. Is there a moment or what have been maybe talk about a little bit about the results? How have you been using this game? What has that represented for you guys as an organization?
Yeah. So in all honesty, like the use of the game has been slower than we had hoped, because we did launch it, again, a boxed game during the pandemic in July of 2021. And we have been selling the physical game, but we also created kind of a private digital version of the game on Tabletopia so that we would have more ways to use it with people while we're waiting to be able to be together in person. So that's been the way we've been able to play it with other people so far. So reaching out to partners or kind of letting organizations kind of in our general sphere of influence know the game is out. Do you think it might be useful for your context? I think some of those early successes have been getting the answer of yes from some of those, and getting to set up some test play sessions on the digital version of the game with some of them. And in one of those test plays in particular, a moment that stands out for me is when we were reflecting on what playing the game had illuminated for the players from our other organization, is that someone said, just help me see so much how the different spheres of society are interconnected and affect education, that we can't just think of education by itself, and it really helped me have that systems view on what was happening, or the dynamics at play, or the things that could unfold for the future of education. And that's part of what we want the game to do. We want it to help model systems thinking as well as futures thinking. So hearing that reflection and some related ones from one of those test players, I think was gratifying, and it kind of showed, okay, we are able to, the game is achieving kind of some of the objectives we wanted for it. And now we just need to get it in more hands and continue to find ways to engage people in playing either with us on the digital platform or, on their own with the boxed game.
Nice. So you also kind of started to explain why the game actually exists for you. Why did you create it? Why did you dedicate yourself to that? Would you care to expound a bit more? Like, what was the motivation behind doing all of this?
Yeah, it's really, we wanted to find a way of helping make the exploration of the future more accessible. Because, it's very often very serious stuff to look at kind of how is the world changing, what are trends that could affect the future of learning. And that can often be kind of depressing, at least at first. You think, because we just as people, we're not really wired to like change. And then also some of the specific trends that or might be unfolding at any given time, might look discouraging depending on one's perspective. And other ones can look hopeful, but it's such an emotional and at the same time intellectual experience to explore the future of learning that making the game really seemed like a way to help just make it more fun, to have all all those serious reference points of, changes that could affect the future, but kind of give people just a different mode in which to interact with those possibilities. And that, so I think I mentioned in the game, everybody has an avatar character from the future, whose interests they're representing, and kind of having to walk in the shoes of another character instead of your day-to-day self. And then also that spirit of competition that most games, including this one, introduce, I think just makes it kind of easier to engage in a lighthearted way with the future while still leaving it with some insights that you can apply, wherever you work or sit.
Interesting. I'm trying to think like when you're explaining that, I'm trying to ground it a little, because in what way? Like when I do workshops around the creation of learning games or gamification, one of the things I don't want to say struggle, but that I have to focus on very much with the learners is make sure that whatever it is you're doing has a very clear and perhaps, as if possible, a measurable objective. Like, oh, the current situation is this, and this is the way we're doing things now. How would that be better? And how can we measure that we've moved from A to B? Mm-hmm. Does this ring any bells? Does that, I mean, was there any of that during the creation process, or looking back, you say, oh yeah, we were sort of doing this and we were able to reach, a broader audience. And that means, we used to go just to these kinds of roles, and now we're also going to these. I don't know. I'm just, saying the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm sure, with your expertise, this hopefully will make some sense with you as well.
Yeah. I mean, we did hope with the game to expand audiences and maybe engage people with who might not be inclined to reach out to work with us for a traditional workshop or to read a publication that we'd written on the future of learning. I don't think we've gotten there yet. So again, because the distribution of the game has been slower than we had hoped. I think largely because it's been hard for anybody to get together to play a game in person. I think we're hoping we will achieve that kind of broadening of audience and engagement, but we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, like for sure, the whole pandemic thing has hit pretty hard in the most of the physical things. Like still, in my classes, we still have some sessions that are online. It's also been a blessing in many ways. I'm going to be teaching in Germany from my house in Madrid in a few weeks. So that 3 years ago that wouldn't have been even a possibility. Like, no, classes are face to face, and you either have to travel or we take you there. Which is a lot more of a hassle. But I was also aiming at, like, you were just saying, like, oh, we're aiming to go to other types of profiles. Did you aim specifically at some type of people, or was it just, to make it easier for people to access it in a more sort of a general fashion?
In terms of the people we're trying to reach through the game, or like the characters in the game, or
the people you're trying to reach, like basically the people you want them to play the game so that they make these explorations, essentially.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. So KnowledgeWorks has traditionally, through our future of learning work, engaged people who have some kind of education decision-making role, or they're interested in education innovation, or wherever they sit in education systems or adjacent to them, they see themselves as change makers with a stake in education. So with this game, we were hoping, yes, to engage people in those categories, which I know are already pretty broad, but that also this might be a tool that could be useful in settings like educators or professional development settings, or might be maybe kind of make somebody like a classroom teacher or a guidance counselor or even a parent, who maybe doesn't normally see themselves as in that really kind of responsible for managing like the whole system of education, kind of creating that large scale change to say, I can engage with the future too, and I can think about, how I want to influence it from where I sit. And with that, I think the hope would be that in some of those kinds of settings that students might want to play too, and they think the game is rated for ages 12 and up. So definitely not the youngest learners, but of course they're very important stakeholders in the future of education. So we hope there'll be times when they can get involved through the game too, where it might be less exciting or just harder for them to engage through kind of that more intellectual type workshop that we've historically done.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, it's always a good thing there to see who you can reach and make that sort of mental exercise as well of, why this kind of game. And when you're making choices, like, yeah, what would, you create a character like, Matt. What would Matt enjoy more, doing this or doing this other thing? And, you don't have to answer the question. Matt does. And that's where, you make those choices a little bit easier in that sense, because you're aiming at somebody. When I say Matt, of course, Matt is a kind of person, and that, it ends up being, it's easier to extend it then to other people than to say, oh, what would this super broad group of people maybe enjoy, rather than say, oh, what would Matt like this mechanic rather than this other one?
Yeah, like a specific user persona.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the experience that you've had with the game, is there some sort of, I don't know, best practice? If you were to implement another game in the future with your organization, is there some sort of best practice, something that you would say, oh, stay away from doing this, or definitely do this, that would help other people?
I would say just making enough space for the rounds of iteration that probably are going to need to happen, even if they don't seem needed at the beginning. So, we did have to cycle through the content details, I think, a handful more times than we'd expected to. So that just general kind of project management principle of kind of padding the time, I think, was a lesson learned. And, when we need to keep reminding ourselves of.
It's sort of easy to forget, or easy to assume like, oh yeah, and I'm not saying you're not, or that nobody is not, but oh, we're smart people. We'll figure this out. This is the time. We'll do it like this, and that's going to be it. It's easy to forget that we're fallible, all of us, in different ways, and with different levels of expertise and so on, and then sort of assume, as you were saying, that no, this will just go right. Maybe not the first time, but the second for sure. It's easy to just fall into that trap that you set on yourself in many ways. It's like, well, there's no reason why you have to put that kind of pressure on you, on yourself or your team. Why not give that a little bit more space, or a little bit more whatever is required depending on the circumstance, for sure. So the great lesson, I'm sure.
Yeah, especially for us, being new to the creation of a game. I think like I mentioned, we did translate a lot from the other arenas in which we work, but it isn't the same. And like making sure to allow that space. And there was one point even where a colleague said, you usually write kind of academic papers. How are you going to write in the way that this game needs? How are you going to write in a fun way? And so, just giving space for that learning and adaptation.
Yeah, making sure that space is there, and that it's it's okay. It's okay to test it out and see how it goes, and all those things. Absolutely. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family, and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag #ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. Katherine, again, from your experience and the things that you've been seeing, I don't know if any of you sort of went into, let's do some sort of go into research mode and read some book or read some blogs. I don't know. Was there any sort of thing that you would take away from this experience that you had where you say, I would definitely recommend people to, again, read this book or read this blog that we went into and was very useful for us?
Yeah, so one thing we did was we reached out to another education organization we knew that had also created a game looking at kind of how might we approach education differently. And that particular organization was Reschool Colorado, who had created a game called Revolve. So even though the kind of content and focus were really different, just like learning about the experience of another similar organization. So in our case, an education nonprofit, who had made a game and that wasn't where they'd started as an organization, was really helpful. And then, we looked too at kind of other things in the kind of Foresight space. And so there's a game had played before called The Thing from the Future. Then we also kind of just use that and other things like that we found as kind of reference points. So like for some context around the one that we were trying to create.
Neat. So I'm seeing from that it's a lot about, collaborating with people that might be in the near field or not necessarily super near, but, in general, near to what you're doing and figuring out what other people are doing who might have been going through something similar, which is always interesting. And in many ways is what this podcast is hopefully about for plenty of people out there, I hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was definitely the spirit of kind of learning from people who had been there before us, but with kind of similar aims. We definitely reached out to and learned about kind of other folks who were looking at games for social change. Resonum was another platform that Maria had looked at. Yeah, so that kind of exchange was really helpful to us.
Great. Good stuff. So, Katherine, is there, any final piece of advice you want to give the engagers who are listening, after your experience, after all that you've done with this game? Please, of course, let us know where we can find out more about you, about, maybe the game as well, about the organization before we take off.
Yeah, so you can find out more about KnowledgeWorks and the Impact Learning Edition game through KnowledgeWorks website, which is knowledgeworks.org. And in terms of final advice, I think kind of just being in the space of experimentation, whether it's just a new game for somebody who's been making games for a long time, or in our case, we're new to creating a game at all, kind of learning from what others have done, building on kind of what's known, but then kind of having that space we talked about to learn, experiment, and extend practice and in consultation with others.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thanks for guiding us to where your work is happening as well. For investing in general this time today with the engagers and providing all of your experience, all that you've done up to this point. However, Katherine, at least for now, engagers, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it's fantastic to have you here, and I hope you enjoyed this interview we had with Katherine. And let me know if you are using, for example, Twitter. I'm posting there, pretty regularly and also answering to people, posting replies, interacting as much as I can. And I would love to connect with you there as well. And you can find my username as Rob Alvarez B. And before you go on to your next mission, remember to subscribe or follow, whatever that looks like on your favorite podcasting app. Do that for absolutely free. It's free now and forever. And then go ahead and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.